Welcome back. Dad's training had finished and he was on a troop train headed for Cairns, the final jumping-off point before joining the battle forces. Things were a bit rough and ready in those days, and Dad recalls an incident between Australian and American forces that shows the Aussie troops were ready to fight. This part of his story includes his first wartime poem, and it's called Ballad to the MT Drivers, a section of the army that he wanted to get into. You know, most of the heroic tales are told of men on the front lines, in the heat of battle, and deservedly so. But there are many other heroes, and Dad's poem acknowledges the work of the motor transport drivers who put their lives at risk to get supplies to the men. I'll let Earl take up the story.
Being attached to I-section, our training was mapping out all the coastline along the Cowan end of the island and physically training up and down the sandhills, the original boot camp. After about 3 weeks, we went back to the mainland and made up a troop train to go to Cairns. I got word to Thelma and she followed me to Cairns and stayed for a few days, where we managed to rent a flat close to where my section was billeted. New troops were arriving every day and we were building up to battalion strength. About a week after we arrived, a boatload of Yanks came ashore. They'd been at sea for about 6 weeks, so had pockets full of money and were looking for some sort of action. You've probably heard what they used to say about the Yanks: overpaid and oversexed. There was a street in Cairns called Sack Street, and that's where all the brothels were centred. The Yanks were queued up 3 deep, and some of our own smart blokes that thought of it got there ahead of them and finished up selling their positions in the queue to the highest bidder. 4 of us from our section who had put our wives with us were having supper at the Greek Cafe. Unluckily for Dawson, he was sitting at the table next to the door when a bunch of drunken Yanks came bursting in, waving handfuls of money. One drunken Yank threw a handful of money on Dawson's table. "I'll pay for a lay." And he grabbed Dawson's wife, shouting, "You'll do." Dawson let him have a good right hand fair on the mouth, knocking him backwards out of the door. He came back up with a knife in his hand, with mates charging after him. We all joined in and a free-for-all started with chairs and stuff being used for weapons. The fight spilled out onto the street and gradually spread. Figures seemed to come from everywhere, and before you knew it, there were fights everywhere. Shots were fired, and it seemed like the war had come to Cairns. The shore patrols and the provost quietened everyone down. Dawson had taken a nasty cut across his ribs before he managed to knock the Yank out, so he grabbed the knife and drove it through the Yank's hand into the wooden step outside the cafe. Then he and his wife went off to the hospital to have the wound stitched. We all left and someone said, "What about him?" to the unconscious Yank. Someone else said, "The shore patrol will find him." So off we went and left him there, which I reckon justice was done, with him starting it. No one was ever charged over the incident as far as I recall, but the Yanks wasted no time the next day getting all their troops abroad and heading off to Brisbane, where they were bound for anyway. I got my army truck driver's licence there and thought about switching back to transport. It seems to me they were getting the best of everything and would always have some sort of dry camp in the truck, as we knew they were heading into rainy country. Bad luck for me, they had a full complement, and there were no spare trucks available, so I stayed with the I section. I wrote them a poem anyway.
Ballad to MT Drivers. There's a mud-bespattered truck standing somewhere in the muck, standing lone, no living hand to guide it. It's been bombed and strafed like hell, bullet holes and scars to tell, and the lifeless driver lying stiff inside it. He had just stepped off his load somewhere miles back along the road to a little bunch of ragged, weary men. 'Twas supplies and ammunition, and to see the men's condition, you could guess a little of it they had then. Yelled and shouted when he came, lustily they cheered his name. I knew he'd get the stuff through, someone cried. But a sacrifice was made, with his life the driver paid. But they would live, though he himself had died. Just when he was driving back on the muddy, winding track, did a flight of Stukas dive out of the skies. And he never even guessed death was clutching at his breast, till the world exploded right before his eyes. Full of pathos does it stand, just a truck in no man's land, saying all your bombs and bullets cannot harm me. Though the driver's life is gone, still his work will carry on. MT drivers, you're the backbone of the army.